I've mentioned before that the abandonment of the demo scene by the AAA developers, for the most part, and publishers, has not actually resulted in the death of demos, but has instead resulted in the indie scene sort of picking up that slack and filling that void with their own demos, because, well, indies often have a very low marketing budget, sometimes nothing at all, and demos are a really, really good form of very organic marketing because they allow you to actually get your game directly in the hands of people to play it and spread it around. And I was a really big fan of demos back in the day. I played them all the time, oftentimes more than full games because they were all I could afford to get. And I really enjoy the return of demos in this way, and seeing Steam doing a Steam Games Festival right now is really cool because it's basically using their reach, their massive size, for a really good purpose. You know, helping these indie devs show off their games, putting up a whole bunch of limited time demos for the people to get their hands on them and stuff like that. It's a really cool event, and I think it's way more interesting than like shoving another Steam sale into the year or something. It's a really cool concept, and I think it's very much worth rewarding because demos are one of the most pro-consumer ways of marketing there is, and it also helps indie devs stay away from the very corporate influence of, like, you know, big marketing firms and stuff. So anything that helps that and also helps us, the players, is a really cool thing. So I think it's definitely worth looking at. So I put together a list of 7 demos that I really enjoyed that I wanted to share with you guys because given the fact that they're free, you can just immediately stop watching this and go play them whenever you want. This is by no means an exhaustive list. By the way, there are tons of demos available right now, and I highly recommend you go to the page and check them out yourself because there's some really cool stuff and I can only fit so many into one video. But I wanted to show people that there are some things that are worth looking at, and there's some awesome stuff to go check out. I recommend looking at the page yourself. All the links will be in the description below to each of these individual games pages, as well as the main landing page for the event. And again, this is going on until the 9th, and, you know, go and play a couple yourself. Maybe you'll find something to look forward to later in the year. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some demos. The first one I took a look at is Potion Craft. This is an alchemy simulator, and it is using this really neat art style where everything kind of looks like a sort of herbology book or something. It's very well done in terms of its visual presentation, and the idea is you run an alchemy shop, and it's very rare to see a very detailed alchemy system in a game. You know, a lot of RPGs have them, but they're generally just like a crafting system to make potions. They're pretty simple, unless you're playing like an Atelier game or something where the entire focus is that. But in this case, this is very focused on hand crafting potions and stuff. You have to do everything by hand, stirring the cauldron, adding the ingredients, crushing them in a mortar and pestle. All that is all done with the mouse with gestures to act as if you were actually doing it, which is a really nice little touch. And you will run this shop by going to your garden daily and picking up some herbs and mushrooms and things, and then having a bunch of customers queue up at your counter in order to buy some potions. They'll make special requests. They can even do some more advanced orders and things later on in the game, and you make them what they want, as well as stocking up various potions that you want to make during the day. And the day doesn't seem to have exactly like a time limit per se, but there's only so many customers per day and things, so you're sort of free to experiment after a while. And the alchemy system itself works in a really interesting way where you have this big map, and adding different ingredients moves your cursor along the map in different directions. Crushing the ingredients before adding them also enhances the effect, making them move even farther in that direction, and you're basically meant to just stir the cauldron with various ingredients to move this map in all sorts of different directions until you land on the desired potion effect or a new potion effect to find out what it is, and then brew the potion up by hand by actually pumping the bellows with your mouse and stuff. You can even change the bottle color and style, the label style and everything, all by hand, so it has a very custom feel to everything, which is super cool. And the actual alchemy map is very large, so there's a whole bunch of different ingredients to discover. And in the full version, there's going to be some other stuff like new bases, like oils, and some other projects to actually start, as well as much larger projects like this big alembic-fueled machine thing that's probably going to be an overarching goal throughout the entire game. And of course there are NPCs that are merchants and stuff that'll sell you rare ingredients, and you can haggle. There's a haggling system for lowering and raising prices, for buying and selling. It's just a really interesting thing, and I think looking at the full version is definitely going to happen on this channel because something that's this detailed is definitely on my radar. The next one I took a look at is the Riftbreaker. This is actually something that I played a demo of a while ago when it first became available, and I definitely wanted to cover it now. It's effectively a combination of real-time strategy, tower defense, and action RPG where you are in a big, very combat-capable mecha suit going around a very pretty map with all these different resources packed in different places, allowing you to mine and things yourself, and then you'll eventually want to set up infrastructure bases all over the place, automated systems, walls and turrets to help defend those things, teleporters to get from one side of the map to the other more quickly when certain areas are under threat, and even craft and find some new gear for your mech, like, you know, lasers, flamethrowers, rocket launchers that can be charged to fire huge swarms. You can lay mines as just general deterrents around like enemy hives, or actually create a minefield on one side of your base if you feel that it might might benefit from it. There are even nuclear mines and things. The explosion effects are very pretty in this game. Actually, just all of like the energy and weaponry and explosion effects are all very nice looking. The game itself has a nice glowy, very organic look to it. All of the foliage is quite detailed in the way that it sways, and the way that everything collapses and gets destroyed is also very satisfying, and that's definitely the case with the enemies as well. The enemies have a very Zerg-like quality with just huge masses of units, a lot of them small, but there are also some fancier, larger ones and range ones and all kinds of things, and I'm sure are going to be in the full game that are terrifying. And there are swarms and swarms of these units that you will actually be creating your bases to help defend against. You know, gates, multiple layers of walls, flamethrower turrets, backed by railgun turrets, backed by machine guns, and you have, of course, power infrastructure to worry about, making sure all of your resource gathering machines are working at good efficiency, but also making sure that you have a good amount of different energy generators like solar, wind, and of course more resource intensive ones, because different ones are good for different amounts of energy as well as different conditions, you know, like at night or during a rainstorm or whatever. It's a little bit sort of Total Annihilation / Supreme Commander feeling, but with a lot more micromanagement of smaller things, you know, like Factorio-esque, you could say, in terms of building an efficient, nice automated factory, but also having to defend it. And the combat is actually really nice, with the aforementioned really pretty visual effects as well as really nice sound assets, a very solid feel to the combat. The weapons have a good amount of impact. I like how varied they are. There's so many different kinds of them with like charge modes and various things like that. And of course, the melee combat is actually really nice. You can cleave through huge hordes of enemies in a very satisfying way with an actual combo. It's not just like a single attack or anything. That's where like a lot of the more action RPG influences come in. So this is another one of the games that I definitely want to cover the full version of when it comes out, because I'm very intrigued by this, and is actually one of the more exciting upcoming releases for me, because it's just such a cool combination of things. The next one is Graven, and unlike the other two, this one I didn't know much about, and it really took me by surprise. It is going for a sort of almost Strife-esque classic shooter with RPG elements kind of added into it, but what it really reminds me of the most personally is Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, and that was a breath of fresh air for me, because I'm not reminded of that game nearly enough, because that game was amazing, and very few games ever call back to that, and this definitely reminds me of that very heavily. Obviously, graphically, it's going for a bit of a different, older style than that, but gameplay-wise, the way the physics interactions work, the way that the weaponry and combat and spells and everything work, it all feels very Dark Messiah influenced to me, which is a very good thing, because I can't really say there's any other game that really makes me think of that very much. It's a pretty great old school looking experience with some nice atmosphere. The atmosphere of the game is really, really good. The music is sparse but nice, and the atmospheric sound effects really add a lot to the theme of being able to see something in the distance and eventually actually go there and explore it yourself rather than it just being set dressing is always appreciated. The variety in weaponry is pretty fantastic, with staves you can bash people with, swords you can dismember people with, huge flails, spells are very fun to use of course, and there are even some ranged things like this weird explosive rock thrower and like a wrist-mounted crossbow. It's very creative with its weaponry, with its spells, with its setting. The voices are quite nice as well, have that sort of creepy vibe, and the overall combat is just really fun, you know, taking things apart, blowing things up, it's all very enjoyable, and the exploration is really nice as well. Notably, the game has like no load screens, which is very impressive, because when you see a game that looks like this, you expect level breaks and loading screens and things, which is fine, because that's just how it normally works, but in this case, no. Going into buildings, going into dungeons, going through various areas, it's all completely seamless, giving the world this very open, exploration-focused, you know, what lies in the dark kind of feel, which is super cool. Also, the rings that you find in Equip actually show up on your character's fingers. Very small detail, but very appreciated. This game has a lot of attention to detail, actually, I've noticed, in pretty much every aspect of it. It's really, really impressive, honestly, and it wasn't on my radar before. I didn't really know much about it, but now that I've played it, it is definitely something that I'm looking forward to, because, like I said, Dark Messiah, awesome game, nothing ever calls back to it. So having something that sort of reminds me of that, with this really fun physical interactions and awesome combat and stuff, it's definitely something that is highly anticipated by me now. This demo definitely did its job in that regard. Next, we've got Loop Hero. This one, I'm not even sure how to place it as far as genres go. It's sort of like a board game meets deck builder, effectively. You are presented with a board, which is really a path, that your character will automatically walk on. You can press space or right click to pause the game, and when it's unpaused, you will automatically walk in a specific direction, and they will automatically battle every enemy they encounter. And the basic idea is you're trying to survive in a world that was destroyed by a lich and plunged into this just darkness of oblivion where everyone forgets everything. And upon upon killing some enemies, you'll get some gear that you can equip on your character, as well as some cards. And these cards are actual locations that you place in the world, on the board, or on the path, or in the distance, or whatever, depending on what it is. And they basically represent your character remembering something. Your character remembering that there was a forest over there, or there was a cemetery in this direction, or whatever. And then remembering sort of changes this misty darkness into something. Something forms out of it that allows them to actually alter their journey. It's a really neat concept for a game, and effectively what you're doing is trying to balance making this board harder to go through, but also getting better and more resources by the end of it. You may place a vampire castle that will add vampires to enemy encounters if you're around that particular part of the loop on certain days, but it will also get you some unique resources and maybe actually allow you to talk to some of the vampires, maybe learn a little bit about them and that they're not all necessarily bad people. Every loop of the board, hence the name of the game, will increase the level of the enemies that you find, so it will get harder and harder as you go on repeatedly, but they will also increase the level of the loot that you find, so you'll get better stuff. And the goal is to just last a really long time, gather resources, get better loot, and eventually either return to camp safely, and you can use the resources to actually upgrade your camp, find survivors, unlock new buildings that can do various things for you and the survivors, and also eventually you'll need to face a boss at the end of each board by surviving long enough to actually sort of call them to you. It's a really fantastic concept, honestly, for a game, and I haven't really seen anything else like it that I can think of. There are other classes that you'll eventually be able to unlock, as well as different boards and different starts that have various different hazards and bosses that you'll have to come up against, and the whole overarching goal is, of course, building up your survivor's camp and making it better, a la Darkest Dungeon, a little bit. This is definitely a very unique one, and I'll be excited to take a look at the full thing, because I haven't really played anything else like this before. The next one is The Last Spell, a game going for a kind of turn-based strategy defense kind of thing, but not tower defense, like a base building defense, with a lot of pretty hardcore RPG elements. This one is super neat because it's effectively like They Are Billions, kind of, but turn-based and with a lot of magic and stuff. It's pretty awesome. You have to defend your city from hordes of undead and otherwise unpleasant attackers at night, and in the daytime you use the gathered resources to upgrade your city, build walls, build new buildings, and all sorts of stuff like that, order different workers around to do various things with the limited amount of time that you have each day to actually accomplish various tasks and the limited number of workers that you have to assign to those tasks. You'll also be equipping and upgrading several heroes, and these are the main things that actually defend the city. Like I said, this is not a tower defense. You're actually using these heroes and putting them out on the front lines so that hopefully by the time the sun rises, the town will still be standing. Heroes are pretty complex RPG units with a full suite of equipment, skills, passive, perks that you can upgrade through very large skill trees upon leveling them up, as well as a bunch of active abilities that are very satisfying to use. You know, big sword swings hit huge numbers of enemies, lightning crashes down and explodes giant groups in a really satisfying way. You feel extremely powerful in this game while simultaneously feeling very vulnerable, because although you can just lay waste, like siege style, to huge swaths of hundreds of enemies, there are so many of them that come at you every night, each one with various different characteristics, getting stronger and stronger every night, that you still feel not overpowered despite being able to cleave through dozens and dozens of them every turn. If an enemy gets past your defenses and into the city walls, you will actually increase the panic level of the city, and your reward each morning depends on the panic level of the city. So the lower the panic is, the more resources and money and everything that you'll generate. And of course, obviously when they get into the city, they'll start destroying stuff. So broken walls are going to need to be replaced. Any sort of buildings, they all have a use. You know, houses provide more workers, and shops allow you to buy things for your heroes and all kinds of things like that. So having these damaged or destroyed is a big deal. So building things in a certain way to make sure that they're well defended and also not too easily destroyed every night is an important part of the game. And this is also going to be a roguelite, by the way. So there's like a soul currency that you earn every night, and although it's not in the demo exactly what it does, it's clear that eventually you're going to die. You know, the waves are going to overwhelm you and you're going to restart, but with these soul upgrades to actually be your permanent meta progression to improve various aspects throughout the game. It is a very fun turn-based sort of defense-oriented game with a lot of unique aspects. The fact that you're just facing off against these huge hordes, and pretty much all of the abilities, even like basic axe swings and stuff, hit like 5 or 6 units at a time. Everything is very much like horde-based. It's also got a nice glowy art style that's very grim and dismal at the same time. So yeah, The Last Spell is something that I've been personally keeping an eye on for a little while now, and it was really fun to actually be able to play it and see exactly what it was like for the first time. Definitely recommend giving this one a shot. Next is Foregone, a Metroidvania going for a kind of Dead Cells looking art style. That's what it reminds me of. It's got a very smooth animation, sort of reminiscent of like rotoscope stuff from back in the day, and a glowy, sort of flat shady kind of look. It's nice looking, honestly, and like I said, it definitely reminds me of Dead Cells. The story seems pretty interesting. You're playing the first of these specific beings, and the world is falling apart around you. There's a lot of mystery happening in the demo, probably deliberately so to sort of set up the story of the game as to exactly what's happening, but it's definitely going to be a pretty neat one to follow, I think. You have both a melee and a ranged weapon. There are a lot of different weapons to choose from, even in the demo, some of which are pretty creative, like the gunchucks, for instance. One of the melee weapons is a pair of nunchucks with guns in them that are just as fun to use as you would think, and there's also other stuff like swords, falchions, scythes, spears, all sorts of things, and then there are the ranged weapons. You have a limited amount of ammo, but melee hits restore your ranged weapon ammo, so you're encouraged to switch back and forth constantly. They are on separate buttons, so you can have one of each equipped at any given time, and there are like pistols, lightning guns, long bows, and some other things, and there's also a pretty interesting upgrade system that involves paying the specific resource that you get from enemies separate from the money resource in order to go along these various skill trees, and you actually have to slot these things that you find into skill trees to unlock more bits above that. So instead of spending a certain amount of skill points on the tree to unlock further bits of the tree, you actually have to socket things into it, loot that you find from elite enemies and stuff, to unlock more parts of it. And there are also some active skills and stuff you can learn that are pretty fun to use, and it looks like those also have a multi-pathed upgrades in skill trees themselves, so every skill is going to have its own upgrade stuff, and I like the fact that the paths seem to be like mutually exclusive paths. At a certain point they sort of join together at first and you upgrade along a certain straight line, but eventually they split and it looks like you're going to have to choose different sort of paths of upgrades for all your weaponry and your special skills and everything along those lines. And the movement system is actually quite nice as well. You have a double jump, a slide right from the beginning, and you can dodge very effectively with those things. So yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty interesting experience, and I like the exploration aspect. The world seems really cool. It seems very interconnected with the classic Metroidvania teleporters that you'll find along the place, and I'd like to see where this one goes. It seems pretty neat. And the final one I took a look at is Unsouled, a game that I was really, really bad at, and yet still felt like I had a really good time playing anyway. It's the kind of thing that I can tell that I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to get particularly good at, fail, and settle for being kind of mediocre, but at least getting through it. It is a top-down action RPG with a very complex combat system, and I gotta say some of the difficulty I was having was because it's a demo, so the tutorial isn't quite finished yet. There were some things that I was unsure about, and the translation is also very unfinished, so I was a little bit confused as to some aspects of the game, but I still had a really good time just trying to figure it all out. It is a very heavily timing-based game. It's basically Dark Souls parrying the game, where your main method of actually dispatching enemies effectively is waiting right until they're just about to attack you and then attacking them, countering and instantly killing them even if they're very tough. It's a very satisfying combat system because it's very lethal. You die very quickly and enemies die quite quickly as well, and you just have to figure out the right rhythm to get yourself in to actually be able to avoid attacks and counter attacks effectively to actually end fights quickly. You also have a pretty large selection of special moves, various different skills and things, although obviously the demo doesn't have anywhere near all of them. There's still a lot of them with various charged attacks and some other buttons that do other things that I wasn't quite sure about, and some sort of like crazy dash thing that consumes this soul resource, and a big explosion thingy that consumes a different resource. I wasn't quite sure exactly how all that worked, but it was still really fun to mess with, and the enemies are very threatening, each one having different attacks and different timings to those attacks they're going to have to learn in order to avoid and or counter them effectively. You also have like this sort of panic move that consumes one of those resources and lets you sort of phase through enemies for a second and just dodge out of the way if your normal dodge isn't quite doing it. You also tend to flash yellow in between every different thing that you do, which is meant to help you chain things together and create the sort of long rhythmic combo chain of slashes, dashes, soul absorption, and special attacks and stuff. And it makes for a very fast, very active combat system that requires you to be quite aggressive, but also stand back sometimes and counter enemies carefully. And I can tell that boss fights in this game are going to be an absolute nightmare, and I'm excited to actually try them out. There's also a soul system where you can absorb souls from various things and actually equip them or use them as active skills and spells, or to unlock more skills for yourself at these sort of shrine-like statues where you go and spend your hard-earned currency on upgrades and things. So yeah, Unsouled is looking like it's going to be a really fun, incredibly difficult RPG with a really nice world. The environment art, the pixel art is very detailed and nice for the environments. I'm a fan of that. So that is just a little bit of a taste of all this demo extravaganza nonsense that's currently available. It's a really cool thing, and here's to Steam doing stuff like this more often. Go check them out yourself. All the links are below in the order that I covered them, as well as to the main landing page so that you can sort through some of the stuff yourself and find some new stuff to try out. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.